Well, good evening, everyone. This is Congressman Bob Goodlatte, and welcome to Facebook Live. This is your opportunity to ask questions about what's going on here in Washington, D.C. We've been getting some questions in already, and we'll get to some of those in just a minute, and we will then turn to some of the ones that you send in right now. But first, let me mention to you that if you're having an individual problem with a government agency, or you'd like to communicate with me about an issue, don't hesitate to contact me either through any of my district offices, but most especially through my website, goodlatte.house.gov, Goodlatte spelled Goodlatte.house.gov. And while you're there, take the opportunity to sign up for my e-newsletter, which is an opportunity for you to get updates on issues that are before our country, and I think you'll find it very useful. You can sign up for that while you're on the website, and you can also sign up on the website for my telephone town hall meetings. These are great meetings where we have people on the phone, and we can have an interaction where you can ask a question, I can answer it, you can give a follow-up, and we do those. We have thousands of people on the line, what we call listed landline numbers. If you have an unlisted number or if you have a cell phone number, we will not call those unless you go to my website and give me the phone number. And we assure you that we will not use that number for any other purpose or share it with anybody else. We know that's important to you to protect your privacy, but if you would like to be included in telephone town halls, take the opportunity to sign up for that anytime. And again, you can contact any of my offices regarding legislative issues, or you can contact my office if you're having a problem with an individual government agency. It might be the EPA, it might be the post office, it might be a passport issue, it might be the IRS, it might be veterans benefits, Social Security, disability, you name it. If it's an issue involving the federal government, feel free to give me a call. We will try to get answers to your questions, contact agencies on your behalf, be helpful in cutting red tape, and I'll learn from that process at the same time. So those are some of the things that my office is available to help you with. And now we'll go ahead and start taking some of the questions that came in earlier today. First, we have Lindsay from Harrisonburg. Her question is, why do you see the proposed health care plan from the Republican Party as an improvement when it will cause millions more Americans to lose their insurance or be uninsured? Well, the first thing to say about that is that the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, has been in a death spiral for quite some time now. Many states have only one plan that is available, so that means that that insurance company offering that plan has monopoly. As a result of the reducing number of insurance companies offering plans for those people who are in the exchanges, and about 4% of Americans are in the exchanges, and that comes to about over 12 million people. So it's important that those people not simply be cut off because we're going to repeal Obamacare, but that they have a transition to a new program where they will have advanceable tax credits, meaning tax credits that you can use throughout the year on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis to pay your health insurance premiums if you qualify based upon your income. And if we do not do that, all of the original promises of Obamacare will completely collapse. People already know that the promise that if you liked your health care plan, you could keep it when Obamacare started was not true. If you liked your doctor, you could keep your doctor was not true. That health insurance premiums would go down by an average of $2,500 per family was not true. So what we're going to do is we're going to give people more choices. And we're going to make sure that when we reform health care, we open it up so people can have more opportunity to get more alternative types of plans from more insurance companies. That competition will lower health insurance premiums, and that will allow more people to stay on health insurance. The fact of the matter is, one of the things that Obama had that I strongly disagreed with was it mandated that virtually everyone in the country had to buy health insurance, had to buy a private product from a private company, even if they didn't want to have that. To me, I think that's wrong. I thought the United States Supreme Court should have struck that down by a narrow 5-4 decision. They did not, but this legislation will end that. So some of the people who will not be receiving health insurance in the future may be because they will choose not to purchase it. I don't think that's a particularly good idea, but there are people who are feeling very healthy and don't think they need health insurance. They should get it, but they'll have that choice, and that will be another alternative. It also will include much enhanced health savings accounts to help people be able to save for their health care costs. And people today on Obamacare often complain to me about the extraordinarily high deductions. Sometimes it's $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 before the insurance company kicks in and pays anything. That is not a good alternative either. If you have health savings accounts that people are able to use, they can pay for a lot of the expenses that are not covered and not have to worry as much about the deductible, or use that to help reach the deductible under their health insurance plan. We want to give people more options, and we want to save the taxpayers money. We have a $20 trillion national debt. The only way to save Obamacare by reforming it is to put even more money into it than is already there. That is not a plan that's workable. Good question, though, and certainly something that we are definitely debating here in the Congress and are planning to vote on tomorrow evening. Our next question is from Hannah from Warren County. Why do you prioritize corporations over people by proposing to reduce EPA regulations? Well, I don't do that. The fact of the matter is the Environmental Protection Agency has an important responsibility to keep our environment clean, but it has exceeded its authority and gone beyond the law in many instances. So there is a lot of feeling on the part of a lot of my constituents that it is costing jobs for individual people. Farmers complain to me all the time about the micro-regulation of their farms at the same time that they are complying with the Clean Water Act. The Clean Water Act was enacted back in the 1970s, and it has the federal government set standards that have to be met, but it allows the states to set the process by which the states and individuals in the states and farms and businesses and communities comply with that law. That is the way it should operate, but when President Obama took office, he entered an executive order that forced the states to adopt plans that were acceptable to the Environmental Protection Agency. That exceeds their authority, and it's really unfortunate because already before he took office, the states, through the efforts that they had made with farmers, with developers, with local governments and communities around the state, had reduced the amount of phosphorus and nitrogen going into our streams by more than 40%, and sedimentation by more than 50%. So we want the Chesapeake Bay to be healthy. In fact, the Chesapeake Bay has been becoming more and more healthy for many years now, and we want that to continue. But the mandates from the EPA would cost $16 billion just for Virginia, and Virginia is just one of 6 states in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So $16 billion would raise the question, is that going to help the Chesapeake Bay? Is it worth forcing farmers and local governments that are going to have to collect water that's running down their sidewalks and streets and filter that before they can put it into streams? Well, maybe, but we asked the EPA and the Chesapeake Bay czar, the person responsible for enforcing this Obama executive order, to provide us with a cost-benefit analysis to show that that indeed would be the case. You know what? After all these years, they have never produced that cost-benefit analysis. So I think that in areas like this and the Waters of the United States rule, which is going to regulate dry stream beds and wet spots in the middle of farmers' fields and other things, that These things need to be curtailed. So I'm pleased that President Trump has delayed the implementation of the Waters of the U.S. regulation and is looking at other things like the impact of these regulations on people in the Chesapeake Bay region. You can have a clean environment and a healthy economy at the same time, but not if you entrust all of the decisions to federal government bureaucrats at the EPA. And we're taking some questions. We have a question from Derek about cutting government spending. And that's an excellent point. It is badly needed, as I mentioned already. We have a $20 trillion national debt. Our annual deficits, the difference between what the government takes in revenue and the amount that it pays out across the board, has been running deficits every single year since about 2000. That's what accumulates to that $20 trillion national debt. Most years nowadays, it runs to about $500 billion a year. It's been over $1 trillion a year during part of the Obama administration, and it is totally unsustainable. And so that's why I'm very pleased that the president has put forward a budget that leads to balance and that makes a lot of recommended cuts in government spending. Now, I know there are lots of people who are concerned about a lot of different areas seeing things being cut. Some of those I have voted over and over again to cut. Others I think have more merit. But what you need to understand about the federal budget is that every president is required by law to submit a budget to the Congress. That is absolutely a critical, important thing. The president, who is responsible for this entire executive branch, has the Office of Management and Budget, headed by my former colleague, a great congressman named Mick Mulvaney, who is now the director of OMB, making recommendations. And that is what was used to put together the budget that the president, he sent a summary of it. Later, he's going to send the details of it. That is basically a recommendation to the Congress, because the budget itself is adopted by the Congress. The House, when things are working properly, the House adopts a budget, the Senate adopts a budget, the House and the Senate sit down and work out their differences, and then they pass a unified budget, a budget that matches up between the House and the Senate, because otherwise you have appropriations going in the House at a different level than in the Senate. That has happened some years, and that is not a good way for the government to do business. But that budget does not have to be signed. In fact, the law does not provide for it to be signed by President Trump or previously by President Obama. So once the budget's adopted by the Congress, then that budget is apportioned to all the various subcommittees of the House and Senate Appropriations Committee, and they then start making the decisions about appropriating funds within that agreed upon budget. We need to have that budget as tight as possible, and I will tell you that every year I vote for the tightest budgets offered, budgets that lead to balance sometimes in just 2 or 3 years. They're tough budgets. We rarely get the 218 votes that are needed to pass those tight budgets. So fortunately, when my party's been the majority, we've adopted budgets that do eventually lead to balance. That hasn't always been the case. In fact, President Obama never, ever submitted a budget the entire time that he was in the White House that ever led to balancing. That is the wrong way to address the spending problem, and we do need to reduce that deficit and cut spending. We also need to grow our economy, because that's another way to reduce the deficit. If you have more revenues coming in, not because taxes are increased, but because the economy is growing, more jobs are created, more people have jobs, more people are able to pay their taxes at the current rates, that also helps. And the last time that the budget was balanced, that's indeed what was happening. The economy was growing at a substantial rate. The Congress had made a number of spending cuts as well, and we balanced the budget for 3 years in a row in the late 1990s up to 2000. And that resulted in $500 billion in surplus during those 3 years. But those are the last 3 years it's been balanced, and that's unacceptable. That's also why I support a balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution. 49 out of 50 states are required to do that, and it's vitally important that the federal government have to do that as well and live within its means. The government is not exempt from the laws of economics, and that's why this $20 trillion debt is a real threat to the future of our children and grandchildren. We've got another question from Jonathan. Why hasn't Congress fixed the VA? It seems they place VA employees over veterans. A very good question, and the Congress works very hard on this. We have given more authorities to the executive branch, and it's important to understand that while the Congress appropriates funds, and veterans are amongst our highest priorities, and we provide many, many billions of dollars every year to provide health care and other benefits to veterans, but the VA programs, their housing programs, their medical centers are operated by the executive branch. And it's my hope that the new Secretary of Veterans Affairs will get in and do a good job of reforming how services are provided to veterans. There have been a number of pitfalls. Many people know of the problems that occurred in many Veterans Administration hospitals around the country, of long waiting lists, of improper care being provided, of care being denied, and we're working hard to make sure that that is being changed. And the President is doing a good job in that regard as well, in making sure that he picks the right people to go into these positions to make these necessary changes. If you're a veteran and you're having an individual problem with the VA, I'd like to hear about it, because we contact the Veterans Administration Regional Office in Roanoke and the VA hospitals in Salem and in Martinsburg, West Virginia, where most of my constituents wind up receiving care if they're veterans. We contact them and are advocates for our veterans. And I'm pleased to say that both those hospitals, particularly the one in Salem, have definitely been recognized as being above average in terms of the services they're providing. But above average isn't good enough for me. If I have a veteran who's not getting the care they deserve, I want them to contact me, and I'll go to bat for them, get answers to their questions, try to cut through red tape, and do everything I can. Sometimes we learn that the law needs to be changed, and I have co-sponsored a number of bills that have become law, and I've co-sponsored others that I would like to see become law that will help veterans, particularly veterans who have served their country for a long time or suffered serious injuries or diseases as a result of their service. We definitely want to make sure they're getting the care they deserve, and if they're not, please encourage them to contact me. We have another one. Aaron from Stanton, will you please explain the roles of the committee you serve on? Well, I serve on two committees. I serve on the Judiciary Committee, which I also chair, and I serve on the Agriculture Committee, which I was the chairman of several years ago. The Agriculture Committee deals with a host of important issues, like making sure that the United States continues to have the safest, most abundant, most affordable food supply in the world, which, based upon international surveys, we do have. But it is very, very important that we keep it that way. And we don't get that by government bureaucracies. We get that by the government allowing farmers and people in agribusiness and food processing industries to be able to do their job. We got to make sure that food is safe. We got to make sure that it's produced in safe workplaces. We've got to make sure that they keep the environment clean as they do so. But that's the principal role of the Agriculture Committee. It's also responsible for forestry programs. It's also responsible for some international hunger issues. And it's also responsible for other nutrition issues like the SNAP program, previously called the Food Stamp program. We need to make sure that those programs operate efficiently and that only those people who meet the income standards receive those benefits. There's a lot of reform that can take place there. There is a lot of fraud that takes place with regard to food stamps, and over the years I've worked on a number of reforms that have helped to cut down on some of that fraud, but it's a constant effort to make sure that the departments of the government do their jobs properly. The Judiciary Committee has a much broader array of issues. About 1/3 of all the bills that are introduced in each Congress go to the Judiciary Committee. Over 1,000 of them in what's called primary jurisdiction, meaning that's the committee that it's primarily sent to, and then several hundred more where we get a secondary referral of a bill. So that's a very major committee, and I'm proud of the work that the committee does. It's a real honor to serve as chairman of that committee. If you have an issue related to some of the things I'm going to outline here in a minute, we have someone at the committee designated to help my constituents, in fact, anybody from Virginia, deal with issues they might have with the Department of Justice or the Department of Homeland Security, the two main agencies that deal with issues that come out of the Judiciary Committee, and that we have oversight of the work of those departments. And then just think of some of the agencies there, like the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the TSA at Homeland Security, the Drug Enforcement Administration, the ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives Agency, and so on. Many, many departments and agencies, many programs, and if you're not happy with something that they're doing, or you want to see more of something that they're doing, we want to hear from you about those. But here are the areas that we work on in the Judiciary Committee. The committee deals with oversight of our federal judiciary. That includes writing the rules by which the federal judiciary operates, the rules of civil procedure, the rules of criminal procedure, all the statutes that are heard in federal courts related to criminal law go through the House Judiciary Committee. In addition, that same subcommittee deals with intellectual property, so patents, copyrights, trademarks, trade names, trade secrets. Intellectual property, these things are the engines of growth in the American economy. Many, many millions of American jobs are related to the fact that our system, our economic system, promotes rewarding people for their creativity, and that's why so many new advances in technology and medical science and other areas take place in the United States because of that system. And those laws are so important to provide the underpinning for that growth in our economy. And then finally, that same subcommittee deals with the internet, what we're working with right now. And a lot of issues related to the internet are the jurisdiction of the Judiciary Committee. If you think about it, the internet is the largest collection of copyrighted works, movies, music, books, video games, other software, motion pictures, music, you name it. It is a wonderful tool, and lots of issues arise with regard to making sure we keep the internet open and it's available for individuals and businesses to use as possible, and that's part of our work on the committee. The second subcommittee is crime, terrorism, homeland security, and investigations. So things like stopping the federal government from gathering metadata about American citizens, as it had been doing for a number of years, and that we discovered a few years ago. That was legislation from the Judiciary Committee, the USA Freedom Act, that ended that government gathering of metadata, and not just metadata gathered under a section of the Patriot Act, but about 6 other federal laws were stopped, and gathering metadata not just about your telephone calls, but also about your financial records, your healthcare records. Any kind of metadata is now barred from the federal government accumulating it the way they were doing previously. That's just one example. There are 5,000 federal criminal laws, and we need to have criminal justice reform. We've been working on that in the committee while I've been chairman, and we're going to continue that work in this Congress. Things like sentencing reform, civil asset forfeiture reform, mens rea or criminal intent, making sure the government can't prosecute you for a crime if you don't even know that you've committed one of those 5,000 federal crimes, or hundreds of thousands of federal government regulations, and other things to promote good policing practices and so on. Criminal justice reform is a strong bipartisan issue that we've worked closely together on. I want to take a few more, but there's lots more to be said, so I'm just going to mention the other committees. Immigration and border security, regulatory reform, and constitution and civil justice. Lots of issues, lots of bills in each one of those subcommittees as well, but I want to take some more questions. I'm going to take one that was offered earlier because I noticed that it was about immigration. It says, what can you say to many refugees legally residing in your district particularly those from countries targeted by the executive orders, reassuring them that they are safe and welcome in their new home. Well, that's exactly right. They are safe and welcome in their new home. If they're refugees that have been lawfully admitted to the United States under our refugee program, they are entitled to be here. As a part of that process, they will eventually get green cards. The refugee program needs to be reformed, and I think that is one of many bills in the immigration area that the Judiciary Committee will be working on during this Congress. But it's vitally important that we recognize that the United States has always welcomed people from other countries. The question is, are they coming to our country legally or illegally? Our legal immigration programs do need to be reformed, but the real problem is making sure that our borders are secure and that our immigration laws are being enforced in the interior of our country as well. And the new administration has definitely taken it upon themselves to do that. Now, one of the things they did just a week after President Trump was sworn in was to roll out a new executive order dealing with 7 countries from the Middle East and North Africa. That rollout was not well done. They included people who were coming here on immigrant visas, which they should not have done. But the purpose of the executive orders are to review the vetting process for people coming to the United States, not just refugees, but people coming here on immigrant or non-immigrant visas. And with regard to the non-immigrant visas, the new executive order halts that from 6 countries, Syria, Somalia, Libya, Sudan, Yemen, and one more that I'm not coming up with right at the moment here. But those 6 countries all have very troubled circumstances in their countries. And it's, for example, in Syria, the country is so war-torn that our government can't contact local governments, can't tap into databases, can't get information to properly vet people. And so it's a suspension for 90 days. The first 30 days, the administration will come up with new, more extensive vetting practices, and then 60 days for the countries to implement those new practices in cooperation with the United States so we can have more information when we make decisions about people coming to the country. It is not a Muslim ban, as some people have referred to it as, because it applies to everyone in those countries, including non-Muslims, and it does not apply to anyone in any other countries, including nearly 40 other countries that are majority Muslim populations, and most countries in the world have Muslims in those countries. And the moratorium does not apply to any of them. So it's not a Muslim ban. It is a measure taken to try to make sure we're doing more to keep Americans safe when people enter our country. We're going to take one more question because we're running out of time, but I want to get to as many as possible. So somebody asked, how about term limits? Do you support them? The answer to that is yes. When I first ran for Congress, I said that I would limit myself to 12 years. When I got here, I found that if people who supported term limits only voluntarily limited themselves, and the people who opposed term limits didn't, the people who opposed term limits would be the only people in positions of seniority in the Congress. So in about my 10th year here, even though I said I'd stay only 12 years, I announced that I was going to exceed that. I did. I was reelected. I get reelected every 2 years if the people choose to do that. And as a result of that, I was able to serve as chairman of the Agriculture Committee, which benefited not just agriculture, but everyone who eats in my congressional district by being able to serve as the head of that committee and now serve as the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. The chairmanships of committees are term limited, and if you bring up term limits for a vote, I always vote for them, but again, it should apply equally to everyone. Let's take one more question. All right. Okay, well, this is a duplicate. It says, can we please pass a balanced budget amendment? That's a great point. Every Congress I introduce balanced budget amendments. We passed one through the House in the 1990s by a very large margin. It failed in the United States Senate by 1 vote. It requires a 2/3 majority in the House, a 2/3 majority in the Senate, and then it goes to the state legislatures for a vote. And it requires 3/4 of our state legislators to ratify. Before it ever gets to them, however, it's got to go through the House and Senate, or 2/3 of the state, 34 of the state legislatures can call for a constitutional convention for a balanced budget or for another amendment to the Constitution. And if they adopt it at a constitutional convention, that's never been done since 1787, when we had the Constitutional Convention that wrote our current Constitution, but it could be done that way. And if it is, then that goes back to the state legislatures. Again, 3/4 of them have to ratify it. I believe a balanced budget amendment is so important that I support either alternative to get it there. But unfortunately, when we've had these votes in recent Congresses, they have not gotten up to the 2/3 majority needed in the House, and therefore haven't even, once they were voted on in the Senate, but that we're even further away from that 2/3. I will continue to press hard for that for the reasons I cited earlier in this Facebook Live event, and I want to thank you very much for participating. We have one last call that's come in, wants to know how I'm going to vote tomorrow on the American Health Care Act. I talked about that earlier. We're still looking at changes that have been made. There may be changes that could come ahead. We want to make sure we look at all those carefully, but it's my intention, based upon the information I have right now, to support this legislation, because I think that it is vitally important that we end Obamacare before it does a lot of harm to a lot of people, and replace it with something that will be longer lasting, will work better, give people more choices, and reconnect them with their health care providers, their doctors, their hospitals, and so on, in a way that I think will promote not just better access to insurance, I'm absolutely sure that will be the case, but also better health care to my constituents and people around the country. So thank you all for participating. This has been great. And again, feel free to contact me through my website, goodlatte.house.gov, if you want to leave further messages or give me your opinion about any of these issues, and I will respond to you. Thank you and good night.